Good morning, everyone. Meteorologist Jim Dickey here in the ABC 7 Hurricane Center with another edition of Tracking the Tropics. Plenty to talk about, especially when it comes to Tropical Storm Dorian. So let's get right to it. Here's the 8 a.m. advisory as I'm recording this hot off the presses, and it hasn't changed since the 5 a.m. advisory. Winds sustained 60 miles per hour. The storm is moving to the west at 14 miles per hour, still the due west. But this is expected to start to make a turn more to the west-northwest, perhaps even true northwest as we work into the day tomorrow. And as we look at the satellite presentation, let's actually zoom in, get the high resolution look from the floater. And yeah, so as we were back about 4 a.m., this had a very well-defined concentric circle cloud pattern right over the center of the storm. In fact, it's trying to make a run at that once again. You see right in the to the left of center of the picture, that's where the center of the storm is. And you can see those bright reds showing up in a near perfect circle. Then to the northern and southern end, we have some banding going on, appears to be spiraling in towards the center. And you're also seeing the evidence of some outflow. See how the cloud field is sort of expanding? And if you sort of track the direction of that, it's sort of going out in a clockwise form. That means it's starting to vent aloft. We have the thunderstorms right over the center. It does appear to be vertically stacked, which suggests this is a healthy, perhaps even further strengthening tropical storm. The NHC in their 8 a.m. advisory acknowledges this, says this continues to show signs of further organization, perhaps even further strengthening. Now, there are lots of question marks going through the near-term and the long-term forecast with Dorian. This is a tiny little storm, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and they are notoriously very difficult to forecast, especially when it comes to intensity. Now, here is the current wind shear situation. So Dorian finds itself right now in a pocket of very low wind shear. It's been in that low wind shear as we were back over the weekend. You see bright red means high shear, and it was back in an area with nearly no wind shear going back through the weekend into Friday. Well, as it works to the north and west, that wind shear is set to pick up. I do think what's going on now near Hispaniola and Cuba will wind down by the time it gets there, but bottom line, shear is going to come into play over the next 24 to 48 hours. Wind shear takes that vertical structure it's trying to set up right now, tilts it, helps to weaken the storm, helps to disrupt the core from coming together. And what will also help to disrupt this storm in all likelihood is the dry air, the Saharan dust out ahead of it. As this works to the north and west into the northeast Caribbean Sea, there is a pocket of dry air or stable air there. That should help to suppress some of the convection around the center, some of the thunderstorm activity. If it mixes that in, that can also disrupt the core of the system and should be a weakening factor too. But these small storms can sort of close themselves off, and it can, again, be tricky to forecast intensity-wise. And I think that's why the NHC is still holding on to the idea that this will either hold surf, hold around a 60, 65 mile per hour tropical storm, and even strengthen a little bit as we go forward here. This is the, again, latest forecast as of 8 a.m. Monday morning. Tropical storm moving across the Windward Islands here tonight. There are tropical storm warnings in effect. And then from there, yes, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, early Thursday morning, a strengthening tropical storm, perhaps even a hurricane moving over land. Now, briefly, let's talk about what the cone of concern is. So we have our forecast, which is the center line. The cone of concern represents the statistical error in that forecast as you go back to the long term through the NHC's forecast, and it suggests that the storm could be on either side of that cone, anywhere within the cone at that point in time. So Puerto Rico still in play for some impacts, of course Hispaniola, and there's a chance this could be even further south than this by the time we get to Thursday. Again, there's a chance, thanks to the wind shear and the dry air, this could have fallen apart by this point in time. From there, the storm continues to track to the north and west. It moves over Hispaniola and Puerto Rico in all likelihood, which includes some high mountaintops and any land interactions, period, especially when we talk about high elevations. That will help to disrupt the storm. So the official forecast calls for this to weaken back to a depression as it moves its way into the southwest Atlantic towards the Bahamas. But again, you note that general direction. Yeah, the cone points that in the general direction of Florida. Let's back things up. So the wind field with Dorian, very, very small. We're talking the core of this. The center is only about 14 to 15 miles wide, and the tropical storm force winds only extend about 40 to 50 miles per hour out from the center. So it's going to be sort of a localized wind event with this storm, unless that field is able to expand. But with that in mind, there's the chance of tropical storm force winds put out by the NHC earlier on this morning. And you can see the area of 80% chance is very, very small, and at this point does not even include any land areas. Doesn't even include Hispaniola, the Dominican in particular, and Puerto Rico. But there is at least a 1 in 3 chance as this moves through that the western end of Puerto Rico, just about all of the Dominican Republic, could see some sustained tropical storm force winds. That's winds over 40 miles per hour. It's an even lower chance when we look at the hurricane potential, the chance of hurricane force winds. The only land area that is even in a 10% chance at this point in time, and actually it's lower than 10% chance for the NHC, is the corner of the Dominican Republic. So the chance for this to be a huge wind event at this point in time is low. But if this is able to come together and really ramp up, those numbers would, of course, go up. The key being this is a very small system, so you have to be very close to the center to get those strong, right now, 60 mile per hour or perhaps stronger winds as that moves its way through. Okay, but yes, by early Thursday morning, this will move over the islands of Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and move back out in the southwest Atlantic. From there, this is how the steering winds set up. So there's going to be upper-level high pressure off to the north and east of Dorian, an upper-level low-pressure system to the south and west of Dorian. The combined efforts of the two are, yes, going to steer that in the general direction of the Florida Peninsula. Some models starting to open back up. Perhaps that high is a little bit weaker. There could be a path for that to get out to sea. Some make it a little bit stronger and force that to the Gulf of Mexico. But most models lining up, as look at the spaghetti plots, to take that in the general direction of Florida. So as we go through Sunday, so into the holiday weekend, again, moving across Hispaniola and then in the general direction of Florida. What these don't say is what the intensity of that storm would be. This could just be an open wave of low pressure and some increased showers at this point in time, or it could still be a defined tropical cyclone. So at the very least, those of us in Florida should be keeping tabs on the forecast over the next couple days. You're going to know a lot more once this gets into the Caribbean. We'll see how it interacts with the shear, with the dry air, how it is able to deal with land interactions going forward. And again, we'll know a whole lot more by the middle of the week. But yes, it will be tracking through the Caribbean earlier this week. Interest in the Windward Islands, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola should be preparing for, at the very least, tropical storm conditions as we head through midweek, and it's not out of the realm of possibility. We could be talking, especially in a small localized area, some hurricane force winds, along with, of course, the full suite of impacts that come from a landfalling tropical system. It will weaken as it moves to the southwest Atlantic. Could completely fall apart. Could fall apart as early as Tuesday or Wednesday over the northern Caribbean. But this thing will be steered in the general direction of the Florida Peninsula, and impacts are certainly possible as we head through the weekend into early next week. Could range anywhere from some increased rainfall to, again, a landfalling tropical cyclone. So those of us in Florida, pay attention to the forecast. Start to think about that hurricane plan, what you'll do, especially if you're on the East Coast. If this is, if the forecast does turn towards this, headed towards Florida. For our interest in Southwest Florida, I don't see much evidence that this makes its way into the Straits and turns north as the historic storms that have hit us did. But of course, we'll be watching it closely regardless. And if this moves across South Florida, we could still see some impacts if it tracks across the state over our region. Elsewhere, to make matters worse perhaps, there's also that same system we've been watching going back to last week. It's in association with a frontal boundary here too, broad low pressure there, and per the NHC, there's an 80% chance something will be able to spin up there. The good news with this one, it's going to head out to the north and east, not a threat to the United States. It will come close to the Canadian Maritimes by the time we get to the weekend, so we'll be watching it. The next name up would be Aaron, tropical or subtropical development, likely 80% chance for the NHC of that. And as we go into the long range, this is by the middle of next week. A couple areas again. This is actually by the weekend. Of course, Dorian, there's your 22% chance of tropical depression winds over the Bahamas into Florida. There's what is likely to be Aaron at that point in time near the Canadian Maritimes. And then also, long out in the future, we'll be watching the next wave to come off the coast of Africa. But a long time before we really have to get in depth about that. Okay, whole lot. But let's get some takeaways here. Yes, Dorian moves to the Caribbean tonight. Impacts to the Windward Islands first. Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, late Wednesday, Thursday. And then moves out in the Atlantic. Impacts to Florida. Certainly a possibility. We'll be keeping close tabs on it. I do want you to be keeping track of the forecast here over the next couple of days as we hone in on exactly what's going to go on in the longer range. And then, yes, storm number 5 could form before the day is through as well. Like I said, we'll be all over this week. We'll be watching Dorian very closely. Stay with us here at ABC 7 on air and online for updates. Till then, I'm meteorologist Jim Dickey. Have a good day.